You don't need a farm to feed your family. You don't need 5 acres. You don't even need one. 1/10 of an acre. That's roughly 4,350 square feet, smaller than most suburban backyards. And it's enough to grow nearly all the food your family eats in a year. Most people hear that and think it's impossible. They picture rows of crops stretching across wide open fields. They imagine tractors, irrigation systems, and full days of back-breaking labor. But here's what the food industry doesn't want you to understand. The most productive farms in human history weren't large. They were small, intensive, and brilliantly designed. And the methods they used are still available to you right now. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to turn a tiny urban lot into a complete food production system. Vegetables, fruit, protein, eggs, herbs, and preserves, all from a space most people waste on decorative grass. Here's the reality. Most families are living right now. The average American household spends $270 to $350 per month on groceries. That's $3,200 to $4,200 a year just on food, and those numbers keep climbing. In the last 3 years alone, grocery prices have jumped over 25%. Eggs, meat, vegetables, fruit, everything costs more, and the packages keep getting smaller. And what are you getting for that money? Produce picked weeks before it reaches your plate. Tomatoes bred for shipping durability, not flavor. Lettuce sprayed with chemicals you can't pronounce. Meat from animals raised in conditions you'd rather not think about. You're paying more for lower quality food, and you're completely dependent on a supply chain you don't control. One bad storm, one trucking disruption, one shortage at the distribution center, and suddenly, your local store has empty shelves and tripled prices on whatever's left. Most people feel this vulnerability, but don't know what to do about it. They assume growing their own food requires land they don't have. They look at their small yard, their suburban lot, their tiny urban property, and think it's not enough. That belief is costing you thousands of dollars every year, and it's keeping you trapped in a system designed to make you a permanent customer, not a self-sufficient producer. The truth is, your small lot isn't the problem. Your approach is. This isn't some new trend or experimental theory. This is how most of the world fed itself for thousands of years. Before industrial agriculture took over, families across Asia, Europe, and Central America grew the majority of their food on tiny plots. Japanese market gardens packed incredible yields into spaces smaller than a modern parking lot. French intensive gardeners in 1800s Paris produced enough food to feed the entire city from small urban plots, using nothing but compost, cold frames, and smart spacing. In Vietnam and the Philippines, families still grow vegetables, raise fish, keep poultry, and harvest fruit from lots smaller than 1/10 of an acre. They don't see it as impressive. They see it as normal because it is. The idea that you need vast acreage to produce real food is a modern invention. It was pushed by industrial agriculture because large-scale monoculture is how corporations make money. Not because it's better, not because it produces healthier food, because it's profitable for them. Small intensive systems actually outproduce large farms on a per square foot basis. Studies have shown that well-managed small plots can yield 4 to 11 times more food per acre than conventional large-scale farms. The knowledge never disappeared. It was just buried under decades of marketing that convinced you food only comes from a store. Today, you're taking it back. Item 1 is vertical growing. Triple your space without adding a single square foot of ground. The first shift that changes everything is thinking vertically. Most people plant in flat rows and run out of room fast, but your garden doesn't stop at ground level. It goes up. Trellises, cattle panel arches, hanging planters, wall-mounted pockets, and stacked containers can triple your effective growing area without taking a single extra square foot of ground space. Cucumbers, pole beans, peas, squash, tomatoes, and even melons grow beautifully on vertical supports. A single cattle panel arch about 4 feet wide and 8 feet long can produce over 50 pounds of cucumbers in one season. That same ground space planted flat might give you 15. When I first started going vertical, I thought it was gimmicky, something people did for Instagram photos. But the yield difference was undeniable. My vertical beans outproduced my bush beans 3-to-1 in the same square footage. Start simple. Set a trellis behind your raised beds. Train anything that vines to climb instead of sprawl. You'll free up ground space for crops that actually need it, like root vegetables and greens. Intensive raised beds are the engine of your urban homestead. Raised beds using square foot or bio-intensive spacing are the backbone of every productive urban homestead. Forget traditional row spacing with wide paths between plants. That system was designed for tractors, not people. In a bio-intensive bed, plants are spaced in tight hexagonal patterns, so their leaves just touch at maturity. This creates a living canopy that shades out weeds, retains moisture, and maximizes every inch of soil. A single 4 by 8 foot raised bed, that's just 32 square feet, can produce 50 to 80 pounds of food per season. Scale that across even 5 or 6 beds, and you're producing 300 to 500 pounds of vegetables annually, from a space smaller than a garage. The key is soil quality. Build deep beds at least 12 inches and keep adding compost each season. The beds get more productive each year, not less. That's the opposite of how commercial farming works. Item 3 is calorie crops, the foods that actually keep you fed. Here's a hard truth most gardening channels won't tell you. You cannot live on salad. Lettuce, kale, and herbs are wonderful, but they're not calorie dense. If you're serious about feeding your family from 1/10 of an acre, you need to grow starches and calorie crops. Potatoes are the king of small space calorie production. A single 4 by 4 foot bed can yield 50 to 100 pounds of potatoes per season. That's real sustenance, real meals, real food security. Sweet potatoes, winter squash, dry beans, and corn round out your calorie base. These are the crops that fill bellies and get families through winter. Our great-grandparents understood this instinctively. They didn't grow decorative gardens, they grew survival gardens. Plant potatoes in early spring, follow with sweet potatoes in summer. Grow winter squash on your vertical trellises to save ground space. Dry beans can be interplanted with corn using the ancient Three Sisters method. Where beans fix nitrogen, corn provides structure and squash shades the soil. 1/10 of an acre, planted intentionally with calorie crops, can produce 1,000 to 2,000 pounds of calorie-dense food in a single season. That's not a fantasy number. That's documented bio-intensive agriculture. Perennial food systems mean you plant once and harvest for decades. Annual vegetables are productive, but they require replanting every season. Perennials are the hidden engine of a truly self-sufficient urban lot. You plant them once, and they produce food for 10, 20, even 50 years. Fruit trees are the obvious choice, but most people think they need acres. They don't. Dwarf and semi-dwarf fruit trees take up as little as 8 by 8 feet and produce 50 to 200 pounds of fruit per tree annually. A single dwarf apple tree can give you 80 pounds of apples every fall. 2 or 3 trees, and you're producing more fruit than your family can eat fresh. But trees are just the start. Berry bushes like blueberries, blackberries, and raspberries fit along fence lines and property borders. They need almost no care once established and produce heavily for decades. Then there are the forgotten perennials: asparagus, rhubarb, walking onions, Jerusalem artichokes, sorrel, and perennial herbs. These plants come back stronger every year, zero replanting, minimal maintenance, and they fill gaps in your harvest calendar that annual crops miss. The goal is to layer your 1/10 of an acre so perennials handle long-term production while annual beds handle seasonal variety. This combination is what makes tiny lots feel abundant. Backyard poultry provides eggs and fertility from a tiny flock. No urban homestead is complete without a small flock, and you don't need a barn or pasture to make it work. 4 to 6 laying hens can thrive in as little as 40 square feet of coop and run space. A well-managed small flock produces 20 to 30 eggs per week. That's over 1,000 eggs a year from a space smaller than a garden shed. At $5 to $7 per dozen for pastured eggs at the store, that's $400 to $600 in annual value. From birds that cost you pennies a day to feed. But eggs aren't even the biggest benefit. Chicken manure is the most potent natural fertilizer you'll ever find. Composted properly, It supercharges your raised beds and builds the soil biology that drives everything else. Feed costs drop dramatically when you integrate your flock with your garden. Kitchen scraps, garden waste, weeds, and even insect larvae from a simple compost system can replace 30 to 50% of commercial feed. And if your city allows quail instead of chickens, even better. Coturnix quail take up a fraction of the space, produce eggs in just 6 weeks, and are legal in many areas where chickens aren't. Your birds feed your soil feeds your plants feed your family and your birds. That closed loop is what makes a 1/10 of an acre feel like 10. Item 6 is succession planting, eliminating dead time in your beds. Most backyard growers plant once in spring and harvest in summer, then their beds sit empty for months. That's like renting an apartment and only living in it 4 months a year. Wasted space, wasted potential. Succession planting means the moment one crop comes out, the next goes in. You're harvesting lettuce in early spring, replacing it with beans in late spring, following those with fall brassicas, and finishing with garlic planted in November. A single raised bed managed with succession planting can produce 3 to 4 harvests per year instead of 1. That alone triples your output without adding any new growing space. The secret is knowing your frost dates and planning backwards. Map out your growing season. Know which crops handle cold, which need heat, and which thrive in the shoulder seasons. Then stack them so there's never an empty bed. Cold frames and row covers extend your seasons even further. A simple plastic hoop over a raised bed can add 4 to 6 weeks on each end of your garden season. In many climates, that turns a 7-month garden into a 10 or 11-month production system. This is how French market gardeners in the 1800s outproduced farms 10 times their size. Not with more land, with more harvests per square foot per year. Item 7 is food preservation, turning seasonal surplus into year-round security. Growing food is only half the equation. Preserving it is what turns a garden into genuine food independence. A productive 1/10 of an acre will absolutely bury you in produce during peak season. Tomatoes, zucchini, beans, and greens come in faster than you can eat them. Without preservation, that surplus rots. With it, your summer harvest feeds you through January. Canning, dehydrating, fermenting, and freezing are the 4 pillars. Each has its place. Tomatoes get canned into sauce and salsa. Herbs and fruits get dehydrated. Cabbage becomes sauerkraut. Berries and beans get frozen. A basic water bath canner costs under $30. A dehydrator runs $40 to $80. These aren't luxury purchases. They're the tools that close the gap between a seasonal garden and true year-round food security. One family I follow online preserves over 400 jars of food annually from a lot roughly the same size we're talking about. Tomato sauce, pickles, jams, dried herbs, frozen berries, and fermented vegetables. Their grocery bill from November through March is nearly zero for produce. That's the goal. Not just growing food, but keeping it. Stacking your pantry shelves with jars you filled yourself from plants you grew in soil you built. That's what real food security looks like. Not a full shopping cart, a full pantry from your own land. When I first started growing food on a small lot, I didn't believe any of this was realistic. I looked at my space and saw limitations everywhere. Too small for fruit trees, too shady for tomatoes. Not enough room for a real garden, let alone chickens. I figured I'd grow a few herbs, maybe some lettuce, and still do most of my shopping at the grocery store. My first year was rough. I planted too late, spaced everything too far apart, and wasted half my beds on crops that barely produced. I think I harvested maybe 30 pounds of food that entire season. It was discouraging. But instead of quitting, I started studying. I read about French intensive methods. I watched what bio-intensive growers were doing on tiny plots. I started tracking my square footage and calculating yield per bed instead of just hoping for the best. Year 2, I went vertical, tightened my spacing, and added succession planting. My harvest jumped to over 200 pounds. Same space, same soil, completely different approach. By year 3, I added a small flock, built a cold frame, and started preserving seriously. That year, I tracked everything. My family produced over 60% of our vegetables, 100% of our eggs, and enough preserved food to carry us through 3 months of winter without buying produce. Our grocery bill dropped by nearly $180 a month. Not because we were depriving ourselves, because we were eating better food that we grew 10 feet from our kitchen door. That's when something shifted in my head. I stopped seeing my small lot as a limitation and started seeing it as a system. Every square foot had a job. Every season had a plan. And the results compounded year after year as the soil improved and the perennials matured. I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you because I started exactly where you are right now. Skeptical, overwhelmed, and convinced I didn't have enough space. You do. Here are the mistakes that kill most urban homesteads before they ever hit their stride. Mistake 1 is starting too big, too fast. People see the vision of a fully productive lot and try to build it all in one season. They install 6 raised beds, plant fruit trees, start chickens, and begin composting all at the same time. By July, they're burned out, and nothing is getting the attention it needs. Start with 2 beds and 1 system. Master those first. Expand next season from a position of confidence, not chaos. Mistake 2 is ignoring soil health. People spend hundreds on seeds, transplants, and fancy garden structures, but plant into dead, compacted dirt. Nothing thrives in poor soil, no matter how perfectly you space it. Invest your first dollars in compost and aged manure, not gadgets. Build your soil first, and everything else becomes easier. Mistake 3 is growing what looks good instead of what feeds you. A bed full of decorative peppers and specialty herbs is beautiful, but it won't sustain your family through winter. Prioritize calorie crops, staple vegetables, and high-yield producers first. Add the fun stuff after your food security is handled. Mistake 4 is skipping preservation entirely. The most productive garden in the world is useless if half the harvest ends up in the compost bin, because it ripens faster than you could eat it. Learn one preservation method your first year. Canning, freezing, or dehydrating, just one. You can add more later, but start capturing that surplus immediately. Mistake 5 is not tracking what works. If you don't know how many pounds each bed produced, which varieties performed best, or when you planted and harvested, you're guessing every year instead of improving. A simple notebook changes everything. Track your results, and your third year will outperform your first by a factor you won't believe. Picture your lot 2 or 3 years from now. Dwarf fruit trees heavy with apples and pears, berry bushes lining the fence producing more than you can pick. Raised beds cycling through 3 harvests a season. A small flock scratching contentedly, turning scraps into eggs and fertilizer. A pantry stacked with jars you filled yourself. Your grocery bill is half what it used to be, maybe less. You're eating food that was alive in the soil 30 minutes before it hit your plate. Your kids know where food comes from because they helped grow it. And here's what nobody tells you about this journey. The confidence changes you. You stop feeling vulnerable to price hikes and supply chain disruptions. You stop worrying about what's in your food because you grew it yourself. You built something real with your own hands on a piece of land most people would dismiss as too small. 1/10 of an acre. That's all it took. Not more land, not more money, just a smarter system and the willingness to start. What's the one system from today's video you're starting first? Vertical growing, raised beds, calorie crops, a small flock. Drop it in the comments. And if you're already growing food on a small lot, share your biggest lesson. What worked? What surprised you? Your experience helps someone else take that first step, and I read every single comment. If this gave you a new way to think about your space, hit subscribe and the bell. You don't need more land. You need a better plan. Now you've got one. Go build something that feeds your family. A kettle panel arch costs under $30 and can be bent into shape in about 20 minutes with basic hand tools. Vertical structures also improve airflow around plants, which reduces the fungal disease pressure common in crowded flat plantings. Tomatoes grown vertically on a single stem produce fewer but larger fruit, concentrating the plant's energy instead of spreading it thin. A simple string trellis system for tomatoes costs under $10 per bed and can be reused season after season with minor repairs. Hanging planters mounted along a sunny wall add growing space that would otherwise sit completely unused for the entire season. Strawberries in stacked planters produce as heavily as ground-planted beds, while occupying a fraction of the horizontal footprint. Bio-intensive spacing works best when combined with deep, well-amended soil, since tightly spaced roots compete hard for nutrients. A double-dug bed, loosened to 2 feet deep in the first year, rewards that labor with a decade of easier planting afterward. Compost added every season builds organic matter faster than most people expect, often visibly darkening soil within 2 years. A thermometer-monitored hot compost pile can finish usable material in 6 to 8 weeks instead of the year a cold pile takes. Raised bed corners, built from reclaimed lumber or cinder blocks, keep material costs low, while still defining the growing space clearly. A 4 by 8 foot bed, filled with a mix of compost, topsoil, and aged manure, typically costs under $40 to establish from scratch. Potato yields improve significantly when beds are hilled twice during the growing season, rather than left flat after planting. Storing potatoes in a cool, dark space extends usable shelf life to 4 or 5 months without any specialized equipment. Winter squash cured in a warm spot for 2 weeks after harvest develops a tougher skin that stores reliably through winter. Dry beans left on the vine until fully brown and rattling inside the pod store for years in a sealed jar at room temperature. Corn interplanted with beans and squash in the Three Sisters method requires no synthetic fertilizer once the system is established. A single dwarf apple tree pruned annually stays manageable at 8 to 10 feet, keeping harvest within easy reach without a ladder. Espaliered fruit trees trained flat against a fence or wall can produce a full harvest from a footprint under 2 feet deep. Blueberries require acidic soil, so amending with pine needles or sulfur before planting prevents years of poor production later. Asparagus beds, once established, can produce for over 20 years with nothing more than an annual mulch of compost. Rhubarb tolerates partial shade better than most perennial vegetables, making it a strong choice for a lot's less sunny corner. A small coop built from repurposed materials can house 4 to 6 hens for under $200 in total construction cost. Deep litter bedding in a coop reduces cleaning frequency to twice a year, while composting manure directly in place. Quail, housed in stacked cages, produce nearly the same egg volume as chickens, from roughly a tenth of the floor space. A simple automatic coop door timer costs about $80 and eliminates the daily task of manually locking birds in at dusk. Succession planting calendars specific to a local frost zone can be found through most county extension office websites for free. A garden journal tracking exact sowing and harvest dates each year becomes more valuable every season as patterns become clear. Row covers made from lightweight fabric protect spring seedlings from both frost and early season pest pressure simultaneously. A cold frame built from an old window and scrap lumber costs under $20 and can extend a growing season by 6 full weeks. Full planted garlic sits dormant through winter and becomes the very first harvest of the following summer with almost no effort. A dehydrator running overnight can process a full basket of surplus tomatoes into shelf-stable dried product by morning. Fermented vegetables require only salt, water, and time, making sauerkraut and pickles some of the cheapest preservation methods available. A single 400-jar preservation season typically requires no more than $150 in jars, lids, and pectin across the entire year. Labeling jars with the harvest date and contents prevents the common mistake of losing track of what's stored in a full pantry. Preserved food stored in a cool, dark closet lasts nearly as long as food stored in a dedicated root cellar for most households. A rotating pantry system, eating the oldest jars first, ensures nothing gets forgotten in the back of a shelf for years. Tracking pounds harvested per bed on a simple spreadsheet reveals within one season which crops are worth the space they occupy. Crops that underperform in year one often simply need better soil or spacing, not abandonment, based on what the data shows. A notebook kept by the back door takes 30 seconds to update after each harvest and becomes irreplaceable by year 2. None of these 7 systems require specialized skills. They require sequence, patience, and a willingness to start with just one. The lot was never the limiting factor for any family running this system. The plan was always the missing piece. 1/10 of an acre, 7 systems, and a pantry that no longer depends on the grocery store's weekly price changes. Start with 1 bed, 1 season, and let the results build the confidence that carries every system after it.